Hebrew, the word for darkness, that one that I circled there at the bottom, one of the meanings of darkness is ignorance. And so therefore, we can put the parallel that the prince of darkness is also the prince of ignorance. We were not called to be in the dark, or to be in ignorance, or to live in ignorance. And although sometimes that seems easier, well, I didn't know. Wherever we stay ignorant, the enemy keeps his control over us in that area. Are you ready to shed some of that today? I am. Wherever we don't have vision or the word or the light of God, that's where the enemy has control. I just found it interesting that one of the definitions of darkness is ignorance. 1 Peter 2:9 tells us this: "But you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for God's own possession, so that you might proclaim the excellencies of him who has called you out of" what? Darkness into his marvelous light. He's called us out of darkness. He's called us out of ignorance. We're a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation. And you know why? So that we might proclaim the excellencies of him who has called us. But do we? Or do we rely on, well, somebody else knows better? No, God hasn't called you to stay ignorant of such things. And he has not called us to stay in ignorance of what comparing does to us. Because comparing can do one of two things. Comparing makes you feel either superior or inferior. And neither honors God. Neither honors God. I feel either that I'm better than, when I compare, well, at least my kid isn't, fill in the blank. Okay? Or, why isn't my kid, fill in the blank? Okay? But either one of them doesn't honor God. I'm having a good day. I had a good Mother's Day until I begin to compare my Mother's Day. Well, I didn't get no breakfast in bed. I got up and made breakfast for everybody else. And look at that pretty, oh, look at how thoughtful her husband is. Well, I can't tell you. Okay? I'm comparing. And comparison, when we do that, it either makes us feel superior or inferior. And neither one of those options honors God. You with me? Okay? Well, I'll never be as beautiful as, strong as, and I'm comparing and I'm contrasting and I'm always seeing, well, if my job wasn't like this, or if I chose this, or why didn't I do this? And does it sound familiar? It's interesting because as I was getting up here, and I told Frank I was going to use it, so here we go. It's so automatic. It's so automatic. He came up and he said, Cheyenne's going to be writing your slides. And I was like, okay, great, but there's a lot of them today. And he says, well, not as much as Brian's last week. And I'm like, really? How many did Brian have? Pretty automatic. And I'm like, don't even tell me. Don't even tell me, because that's exactly what I'm speaking on today. I don't want to know how many Brian had. It's all right. But we do it and it's automatic. We don't even have awareness that we're doing it. And guys, that's what keeps us in ignorance. That's where the enemy has that stronghold, because as long as you're comparing your life to somebody else's, and he's got you in this narrow-minded, you will never actually work on your purpose, your calling, what God has assigned to you. Because it's not as good as, and it's not as flashy as, and it's not as, right? That little voice that travels with us whenever we compare is a thief. It's a thief. It's robbing us of some things. When we wish our lives looked like somebody else's, we allow the what-ifs to fill our mind. We get into that grass is greener mindset. We let that comparison rob us of truth. And it can only take a matter of seconds before it changes your attitude. It takes seconds to take our eyes off of Jesus and put our eyes on the things that will never satisfy us. But they look like they should. Right? Paul stated it this way in Galatians 1, verse 10. He said, for am I now seeking the approval of man or of God? Or am I trying to please man? If I were still trying to please man, I would not be a servant of Christ. I really think that Paul, in his own, Saul, pre-Paul, okay, probably had a lot of people pleaser in him, as Diana does. And he's wrestling this out loud. He's like, for am I now seeking the approval of man? Because here's what I've learned. I can't please you all. But I wasn't really called to. Because if I was called to, then I wouldn't be a servant of Christ. Because that weight of that calling, I understand. It's heavy. And here's what I say. I wasn't called to be everybody's favorite, everybody's flavor. And that's got to be okay. Because I'm really after an audience of one. God, what is it that you've called me to? Do I please you? Keep my eyes on my purpose. And the other things become auxiliary. God made it clear that we're not on this earth to make people happy or even ourselves happy, but to live for him, which will ultimately bring us the most joy. So when we don't do that, we find ourselves stuck in the land of Ur. You're stuck in the land of Ur. Well, if I was only richer, if I was only stronger, well, if I was healthier, okay? If I was funnier, whatever the is, whatever they have, I want to have And I'm stuck in. I did a women's conference years ago, and before it, I wrote this poem. I did it like in this seat as I was getting up, so I'm not even sure what it sounded like, but it made sense in my head. And it was called Lady If Only. And this story, this little poem, was a woman who, if only I had this, and if only I had that, and she chased if only all the days of her life. Only to get to the end of her days and realize none of it felt like her purpose. And we get stuck in the land of Ur. I want this and that And then when we get a taste of that's not good enough. Now I want ist. I want to have the bestest. I want to be the richest. I want to have the best businessest. And I want more and more. And what we're chasing is something that cannot fill us. When I looked up comparison in the Bible, I found 40 verses, and I'm sure that wasn't all of them. So what does that tell us? That God knew that we would struggle with this, or else he wouldn't have addressed it so many times in Scripture. So what does God ask us to do regarding comparison? I'm going to give you some four things towards the end, but let's build on it from here. The first thing he tells us to do is to turn in the opposite direction and remember who we're living for, not what we're living for. Who are we living for? God should be the only one that we're living for. Anything else of the world will pass away, and it won't bring any sort of lasting fulfillment. 1 Timothy 6, verses 6 and 7. 1 Timothy 6 and 7. But godliness with contentment, there's that word again, is great gain, for we brought nothing into the world, and we cannot take anything out of the world. I don't know about you, but that verse really just hits hard. All those things that I'm trying to acquire, all those things, the comforts and the things that I think will make me happy, none of it goes with me. If anybody's lost somebody close to them, they know that. If you've ever had to deal with somebody's stuff after they've passed, you know what I'm talking about. None of it goes with us. I heard a preacher say once, only two things that you get to take. Your love of God and your relationships, your love with other people. Those are the only two things that travel with us. But everything here that we work so hard and we invest our life in stays behind. So we have to pray for strength to resist comparison. Because anything we try and do and accomplish on our own, in our own strength, is futile. It doesn't work. It's only Christ's power in us that brings us the victory in this daily struggle called comparison. And can I tell you, our most powerful weapon is prayer. It is the most underrated and most powerful. It's like, I don't know why I do this, but I do this because we're human. I'm human. Wait till it's the last resort. And I do this I do this for a living, so I'm talking about this all the time, right? And then it's like I get into that argument with my husband. And instead of praying first, no, I have to exhaust all of my verbal karate moves, right? I've got to try it all on my own and then get to the end of myself before well, God, I'm going to need a little help here. It's like, when are you going to learn this lesson? I don't know. Another round around the mountain. I don't know, God. But it's like the most powerful weapon I have access to. If I learn to enlist it first, I'll save myself a lot of heartache. And I'll also stay focused on what's really important. Because honestly, the stop that he made the other day because I didn't think it was the right stop, doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things, right? I wasted a good hour of my life. Enlist prayer first. God, I'm struggling with this. I'm frustrated with this. Can I give it to you? God, I have a hard time when I wake up and I scroll because I'm comparing myself. And I find myself less patient, less happy,